top 10 decks for the month of May 2023. I just want to thank everyone who came out and liked last week's videos, my most liked video for the week. And this is a meta report. And my understanding, the word meta is an acronym for the most effective or efficient tactic available. Might be wrong on that, but it's kind of what we're trying to do here. What decks are the best? What decks are functioning well? That being said, the meta is wide open and a lot of decks can be piloted if you know the deck. You can play a lot of different decks. There's just some that I think are a little bit better than others. And this one right here, for me, hands down, is the best deck in the game right now. And then there are a lot of other decks that are very good. The combo of this deck is to play Black Bolt on turn 5, move your Jeff over on turn 5 as well, dropping the cost of Miles Morales down to 1, stature down to 1, having Zabu out there, having some nasty things go off with Enchantress and or Shang-Chi, Rock Slide for disruption, Korg for disruption. Very effective deck. And Darkhawk puts up a lot of power as well. Polaris potentially could be disruption. Also, one of the ways to fuel the cost reduction on Miles Morales Spider-Man. Couple cards can be subbed out here, and I'm not sure that you need Nebula or Jeff for this deck to be good. You could definitely be using Nightcrawler. In fact, before Nebula came to the game, the build had Nightcrawler, and I don't know that Nebula is making the deck that much better. Definitely puts more stats out there for sure, but Nightcrawler is very effective. And then if you don't have Jeff, you can use Cloak. Now, the next 3 decks we're going to talk about are very, very strong, and I feel like largely the meta right now is defined by 2 cards. That would be Darkhawk, obviously, and a lot of the good decks that we're going to talk about have Darkhawk, and a lot of the decks that don't have Darkhawk are running Killmonger. So we're going to talk about some of these other ones that run Killmonger that are very good, and this is Sarah Control. This is not a new archetype. This is not a new deck. It got a lot better when Hitmonkey came to the game, and before Hitmonkey, it ran armor in place of Hitmonkey. Now, there's a couple versions of this deck out there. There's some that run Zabu. I think that's okay. There's some that run Lizard, but I think Polaris is a lot better. I just want to say that Polaris is one of my favorite cards. Galactus is kind of annoying, and if you know that Galactus is coming down, sometime you can pull over their Daredevil or whatever they have over there and have a counter to Galactus, which is very interesting. I also want to point out the synergies with Mysterio, Bishop, and Hitmonkey. Mysterio is an interesting card. It is 3 cards being played simultaneously at the 3 time. They're all zeros, and at the end of the game, the real Mysterio converts to a 4. So this triggers Hitmonkey for 3 times. So like on turn 4, you can play Mysterio and Hitmonkey will get 6 stats. If Bishop's on the board, Mysterio will count for 3. And some of the cards here are amazing combos. I love this deck, by the way. This is one of my favorite decks. Shang-Chi and Enchantress are amazing. But the idea is that you kind of want to have some surprise for the last turn, whether that's Scarlet Witch changing a location, Killmonger killing your Nova, and or placing Nova and Killmonger on the last turn when Sarah's in play, and then putting a bunch of stats out on the board, and then Shang-Chi and Enchantress are just like, boom, their Darkhawk is deleted, boom, their big bad is deleted, and I think that's a pretty big deal. I love this deck. Easily one of the best decks in the game right now, and I highly recommend on turn 5 snapping before you play your Sarah. I mean, that is the play. Snap, play Sarah on turn 5, and then on turn 6, all the crazy stuff goes off. Another Sarah deck, and I'm not sure which one is better. They're both viable right now. But Silver Surfer Sarah is very useful right now. Now, this one deck is mostly around Storm. Juggernaut, is excellent behind Storm on turn 4. I will say that Juggernaut can be a little bit awkward if you do not play Juggernaut immediately preceding Storm. Sometimes Juggernaut can bounce things into the Storm lane, which is not desirable. Goose and Polaris provide some counter to Galactus. Not really, but a lot of the same tactics here, and there's a lot of versions of the deck, but the ones that include Polaris are my favorite, and I just want to say I'm a big fan of Polaris. There's just a lot of times where moving a card over to a lane clogs them, and puts them in a situation that they wouldn't, where they have limited amount of board space. There's just a lot of little cool tricks that you can do with Polaris. So this is a very popular deck. Also, a week from now, Kitty Pryde should be coming to the game, and I think we're going to see a resurgence of Collector and Bounce for sure, which also might make Killmonger even more important of a card if we're going to have to deal with, Kitty Pryde and Bounce decks if they start becoming a thing. Although Bounce decks have a reasonable way of getting around Killmonger, but just keep in mind that Killmonger might even become more important going forward. And then the third deck that we're going to talk about here, which I think is also very viable right now and is making a resurgence, and that is Deathwave. This is another oldie but goodie. It's been around for a long time, and Killmonger is very effective. And the idea of this deck is to play Wave on turn 5, float 2 mana so that you can play She-Hulk for 2, maybe Death for free, right? You can play Death for free if you blow up enough of those squirrels, and with the Killmonger and Carnage and all that, like if you got the destroy count high enough, you could be potentially be playing She-Hulk for 2, Death for free, and then something annoying like Enchantress or Doctor Doom. Now there's 2 versions of this deck. Choice is yours, depending on where you think the meta is. Some decks play Enchantress, other decks play Shang-Chi, but pretty much the build is some people don't run Squirrel Girl, but largely this is a very common build. Now we're going to talk about Darkhawk, and Darkhawk will be dropping from Series 4 to Series 3, and if you have Rock Slide, you're set up for a good time when Darkhawk goes from Series 4 to Series 3. My prediction, that'll be a week from tomorrow, where we should have a patch. That's where I'm also expecting that we're going to get Kitty Pryde for free. We will see. That's not set in stone. But this is a largely known Devil Dino Darkhawk package. The Darkhawk package, which is being ran in a bunch of decks, is typically Korg, Rockslide, and Darkhawk. Sometimes they throw in Black Widow, but Black Widow's the weakest for sure. And then there's the Devil Dino package, which you want to fill up your hand using sometimes the Moongirl, of course, is the logical choice, right? But sometimes that will be, Sentinel keeps your hand full. Sometimes it's White Queen. Sometimes it's Agent Coulson. Mystique to copy Darkhawk. Mystique to copy Devil Dino. Zabu allows you to play a lot of these cards on turn 6. Dr. Doom can be pretty effective if you're playing against a Sandman deck, or if you need to get into another location. And then Cosmo is a defensive measure. Play Cosmo on turn 3, hide your Darkhawk or Devil Dino behind the Cosmo, and then copy that with Mystique. And I do prefer the builds that run Cosmo, because Enchantress is running everywhere. Bounce decks, another deck that runs Darkhawk. And this is one of the few Darkhawk decks that does not run Rock Slide. It does run Korg and Black Widow, and the idea there is that you're going to play them multiple times through Beast and even possibly Falcon. I think this is an important deck to understand and know, especially when Kitty Pryde comes out. And I'm sure there's going to be some fine tuning to this deck where it'll include Collector and Kitty Pryde. I expect that to be a thing. So this deck is not going away. It is just going to get better. And again, it's a Darkhawk deck. Now, we're going to kind of get into the rest of the decks, and all of these decks are great. They're amazing. Like I said, if you're a skilled pilot, you understand the deck. The game is mostly about snapping, knowing when to snap, when to retreat, knowing when you see a location that's favorable to your deck versus it's unfavorable to their deck, so on and so on. So you just know your deck well, when to retreat. There's certain matchups that are just terrible for you. And so a lot of that has to do with understanding. And I think any of these decks here are viable. This is a variation of Deathwave that runs good cards instead of the Destroy package. Destroy package would be like Yondu and Death and Carnage and Bucky and all of those cards. So this is just runs what I call good cards, effective cards, which Sunspat, Iceman, Scorpion, Lizard, Mr. Fantastic. That's great. Also, this deck runs Lizard, which has synergy with Enchantress, and then of course Shang-Chi is there. And that the same idea here is to play Wave on turn 5, float 2 mana that gets soaked into Sunspot, let's say, and then you play She-Hulk for 2, and then something else, whether that is something that destroys something, or it's Doom, or Era, or Chavez. And that also restricts some of the play of cards that like to dump their hand on turn 6. So a lot of the decks that we were talking about at the beginning of the video just like to dump their hand on turn 6, whether that is a Stature and a Miles, or if Sarah comes out and then they just play like Hitmonkey and Mysterio and a bunch of other cards simultaneously on turn 6. So Wave is one of the few counters kind of to that. If they have Sarah, then of course they can play 2 cards still. Stature is not affected by Wave. Stature still costs 1, so that's interesting. They did mention that they might change something like that. So this is a version of Deathwave. This one I believe is just called Doomwave. I personally like the Deathwave version better because it runs Killmonger. Lockjaw. I've had some fun playing this deck in the last couple of weeks. Definitely has some RNG mechanics, and it is, in my opinion, still relatively consistent, but it has some interesting mechanics that are random, which is Lockjaw, Dracula, and Jubilee. So this is pretty much a casino deck, and there's some different versions of this deck. Some people are taking out Captain Marvel and Yellow Jacket and running, let's say, like Nightcrawler and Jeff, which can be pretty effective with Lockjaw, because if Lockjaw pulls Nightcrawler out of the deck, then you can move the Jeff or the Nightcrawler out of the way. I think it's great. Discard. I played a lot of Discard this week. I still think that this is the best build, or one of the best builds for Discard. I did try quite a bit removing some of the random discard effects, which would be Moon Knight, Swordmaster, and Hellcow, and replacing it with cards that synergize with Storm, and I included Storm and Nebula and Jeff. So there's 2 versions of this discard build, in addition to a Hela build. Now, Hela builds are good. I don't like playing them. Hela builds are high variance. They get a lot of cubes. They get a lot of 8-cube games, but they also have lower win rates, and they're just a lot more unpredictable. And so I think if you're a more patient player, consider a Hela build. Hela build is something that I'm going to be looking into once I get to Infinite. For me, I find that I'm a little bit impatient, and I get annoyed with the randomness of Hela in general. And also for me, I prefer the Storm version of this deck that does not run Swordmaster, Hellcow, Moon Knight, and it runs like Nebula and Jeff instead. Also, we got to talk about Galactus. Now, there's 2 major versions of Galactus. There's this one right here. which is largely a static build. Some people replace Coke with, say, with Wolverine or Daredevil, but this is just like the standard Galactus build. And then there is the 2 win condition turn 6 possible Galactus, which is runs Nimrod, Shuri, Taskmaster. A lot of people use Taskmaster to not only copy Nimrod, but Destroyer or Death. So there's a lot of function on these decks. Now, I just want to say that Galactus is a polarizing card, and my opinion on Galactus has changed. The win rate and the play rates of these decks are very high, and I suspect that they won't be looking to nerf Galactus directly, but they might do something to one of the cards that makes Galactus viable. And even though there are multiple counters to Galactus, what good are they if there's an Electro on turn 3 into Darkhawk on turn 4, and all of your counters are stripped out of your hand? One of the ideas I've seen floating around out there is to change Darkhawk to a 6 cost, maybe like a 6/14 or 6/15 something, and that would prevent that from happening. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if I want that to happen. I've been largely in the camp of leave Galactus alone. Sure, it's annoying, but they have said publicly that they understand Galactus is an annoying card. It's a polarizing card, and because of that, the Galactus decks are under a different type of scrutiny. That's how they worded it. And so I suspect that there might be changes to Darkhawk, or maybe even Spider-Man. Spider-Man's another card that they singled out that is in that polarizing / unfun / annoying category, depending if you're the one playing it or not. I mean, it's fun for the people that play it. Anyways, Galactus is still a viable deck. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 more decks right here that are kind of on their way out, but people are still playing them a lot, and they are getting good results. I believe all 3 of these next decks you can definitely climb with if you're familiar with the deck, and that is Patriot. There's a couple versions of this deck. Some people run Thing instead of Super Skull. I'm also super interested to see what happens to the Patriot when Iron Lad comes to the game, because Iron Lad, which is coming out tomorrow, copies the abilities of the next card, where that could be super favorable inside of a Patriot deck, because then at a minimum, let's say it copies Wasp or Misty Knight, Iron Lad then just becomes a fancy thing that potentially could have copied Patriot. Very interesting. Of course, that wouldn't synergize with Mystique, and maybe an Iron Lad build wouldn't run Ultron. I'm not really sure, but I'm really interested to see what happens to Patriot going forward with an addition to Iron Lad to the game. I think Iron Lad is going to see play, and I was reluctant to purchase Iron Lad. I'm definitely sold on High Evolutionary, which is going to be a big bag. Big bad, big bag, right? There are 6,000 tokens, big bag. But yeah, I think Iron Lad might have a home inside of Patriot. Also, I just wanted to acknowledge that a lot of people are still playing Electro Ramp. The play rate on this deck is still fairly high. The cube rate is not. So I feel like Galactus and Electro Ramp, which are counter plays, typically are lower cubes, but they still see a lot of play. I think it's important to understand this deck when it's obvious that you're playing against Electro Ramp, and your deck really prefers to go off on turn 6. Maybe consider going off on turn 5. There's been a lot of times where I'm playing a deck with Sarah, and it's very obvious that I'm playing against a Sandman deck, and the Sandman's coming down on turn 5, and instead of playing Sarah, I'm dumping my hand. I just dump my hand on turn 5 and see how it goes, and I've had a lot of success with that. And then there's also a Thanos junk deck that is very good, seeing a lot of play. I feel like this deck, I've played this deck. This deck is difficult to play. I personally found it to be a little bit inconsistent, but I know other people are having success with it for sure. Now, I'm going to talk about 4 decks that I am, and 4 archetypes that I am personally avoiding. I do think that there are better builds than what I'm going to show on the screen. I also think that there are certain players that can play these decks very well and will have good results. But these 4 archetypes are decks that I am personally going to be avoiding. I do get a lot of requests to play these types of decks, but I feel like there's some cards missing, or they're just not worth the hassle, or they're a little too complicated, or if I spent more time playing them, then I would be able to play them. Firstly, would be Mr. Negative decks. Mr. Negative decks I have found to be pretty inconsistent, and I know that when I play up against a Mr. Negative player, you know, if their Mr. Negative pops off, you know, early, I'm typically retreating if it looks like they're going to have, you know, an inverted Iron Man or something like that. Very poor cube rate, very poor win rate. I'm personally avoiding negative decks at this time. Like I said, I think there's probably better builds, and but I'm surprised by how many people are playing this with these kind of results. So this is a deck that I'm personally avoiding. This deck right here is a control deck. I have not played it. I'm actually a little bit confused by what it's trying to do. I have not researched this deck, but I can see that it has a very high play rate, a large sample size of games played, with a negative cube rate and a negative win rate. Cerebro 3. Cerebro 3 is a deck that a lot of people ask me to play. I feel like there's some missing pieces in Cerebro 3, and there's some cool things that Cerebro 3 can do that Cerebro 2 can't do. But when I look at the numbers and I consider the recent changes made to Luke Cage, I feel like Cerebro 2 is a better option, mostly just because of Brood. Brood is such a powerful card to put out 3 slots, and to a lesser extent, Mr. Sinister, which puts out 2 slots, which just doesn't happen with Cerebro 3. The advantages to Cerebro 3 is that there are more choices for location control, whether that is Magic or Rhino, and some people play Scarlet Witch, where Cerebro 2 is pretty much restricted to Storm. But anyways, I'm going to be looking into Cerebro 2 once I hit Infinite. That's a deck that I wanted to play specifically with Luke Cage and Hazmat. I also think Luke Cage is going to get a lot more play when High Evolutionary comes out. And then lastly, decks that I'm avoiding right now are move decks. And I think that there are people that are really good at playing move decks, and you can have success with move decks. I've always been fascinated by move decks. I also think that there are a ton of cards coming out. And for me, like once I get to Infinite, I don't care about whether I win or lose. I want to pursue move again. I did play move a lot about 6 weeks ago, and I found it to be highly engaging, fun deck to play. But far as meta goes, most effective or efficient tactic available, I don't think move is there. And again, negative cube rate and negative win rate with a lot of games played. All right, let me know what you think in the comment section. I think there's a ton of viable decks. What is working for you? What did I leave out? I'm sure there's some that I missed, but I do think overall the meta and the environment right now is in one of the best places right now as far as the total number of decks of effective. And the only real runaway deck right now is this one right here, which people don't seem to mind that it's good. Like, it's generally okay to play against, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let me know what you think in the comment section. As always, thanks for watching. Keep on gaming. Bye for now.